The saint that I'll be talking about this evening is Saint Fidelis of Sigmaringen. It was funny because I originally had other saints in mind when I saw the list, but I got distracted and all the saints that I was familiar with got picked. I was like, oh man. So when I went, there was only like 3 left. But God is so good. When I first read about this, originally in the opening sentence, it talked about how he was a lawyer and, really liked school and all that stuff. I was like, I have nothing in common with this guy. But fortunately, God is so good that as I read on and I did my research, I actually found out, you know what? Me and him have a lot in common. And it was actually good because it reminded me some things that I needed to remember. One was, it started from a young age. He was one of 6. I'm also one of 6 originally. His mom remarried, so did my mom. And he joined the friars later on in life. He was 34 years old, and then he would say that he wanted to make up for those 34 years. And that is something, those 34 years that he spent out in the world. And that's something that I always said, like when I first joined, I was like, you know what? I want to make up for all those 34 years that I was out there, not doing God's will. And also another thing was that he would constantly pray for 2 things. He would pray that he didn't want to fall into mortal sin, something I've prayed for. I was like, God, please don't let me, sin that badly. I constantly keep that in my prayer. But this next one, he would also pray to be a martyr. I don't pray for that one. I know better. God has been so good that he answers my prayers, so I never pray for that. But anyway, so now into his life. St. Fidelis was born in present-day Germany in 1577. His baptismal name was Mark Ray, after the evangelist Mark. He was one of 6 children. He came from a religious and wealthy family. His father died when St. Fidelis was 19 years old. Soon after, his mother remarried, and he and his brothers were not happy with the marriage. But not long after, his mother also died, and the orphans were placed under the city's protection, under the care of a tutor. But lucky for them, he was a very devout Catholic. Mark studied at the University of Freiburg and worked for a time as a private tutor. Eventually, he went back to the university and earned his law degree around 1611. Though he had already shown signs of devotion to God and studied canon law alongside civil law, Mark opted for a secular career as an attorney. Within a year, he was known as the poor man's lawyer because of his concern for the needy, but just as quickly, he became disgusted with the corrupt ways of his chosen field. Leaving his legal practice behind, Mark decided to give his life directly to the service of Christ and of the church. In short order, he received ordination as a priest and joined the Capuchin Franciscans in Freiburg. With his entry into the order, he received the name Fidelis, meaning faithful, after the words of Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation, "Remain faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." As he embraced radical poverty and simplicity, the attorney turned Franciscan left the inheritance to a scholarship fund for poor seminarians who also received his books. He made it his point to live out the virtues and the Franciscan and Capuchin charisms: humility, poverty, and penance. A fellow friar said he was admired by fellow novices as well as older friars. He was determined to make up for the 34 years he had lost in the world. Since he entered the order, he had constantly prayed for 2 favors: one, that he might never fall into mortal sin, and the other, that he might die for the faith. St. Fidelis showed his love for God through prayer and fasting, while caring for his neighbors through preaching, writing, and the celebration of the sacraments. He showed particular care for the poor and sick, and was specially revered for his work among Austrian soldiers who were suffering from a plague pandemic. During 1614, a Swiss Catholic bishop had sought help from Capuchins to restore the faith and counteract the spread of Calvinist heresies. In 1621, St. Fidelis was sent on a mission to Switzerland to combat the Calvinist heresy. He brought just 4 things: a Bible, a breviary, a crucifix, and the Capuchin rule. The years of 1621 to 22 were a busy period of preaching, instruction, and theological disputation for the Franciscan priest. He preached not only in Catholic churches, but also in public places, and even in the meeting places of Calvinists themselves. Soon, some Swiss Protestants responded with hostility, but many others were also brought back to the church. Those who observed the mission felt that success was more attributed to the prayer of Fidelis during the night than to his sermons. Like many cases of religious persecution during this time, Fidelis' treatment at the hands of the Calvinists was not exclusively from doctrinal disagreement. National and cultural tensions also contributed, with many Swiss Protestants suspecting that the Catholic mission was part of an Austrian plot against their nation. This hostile situation boiled over on April 24, 1622, when Fidelis' preachings provoked a riot at a church in the village of Siwis. Some Austrian soldiers were killed in the uproar, and a would-be assassin shot at the priest, but luckily missed. After politely declining an offer of help from a Protestant, Fidelis was confronted outside the church by a mob and told to choose between his Catholic beliefs and his life. Fidelis was defiant and said to them, "The Catholic religion is the faith of all ages. I fear not death." St. Fidelis was beaten and stabbed to death. The sight of his martyrdom, however, is said to have converted one of the Protestant preachers who led the mob. A succession of attested miracles led to his canonization in June 29, 1746, as a martyr. St. Fidelis is the patron saint of lawyers. St. Fidelis' constant prayer was that he be kept completely faithful to God and not become lukewarm or apathetic. He was often heard to exclaim, "Woe to me if I should prove myself but a half-hearted soldier in the service of my thorn-crowned captain." His prayer against apathy and his concern for the poor and weak make him a saint whose example is valuable today. The modern church is calling us to follow the example of the poor man's lawyer by sharing ourselves and our talents with those less fortunate and by working for justice in the world. St. Fidelis,